You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
Yes?
I don't know. I would...
This is Peter Thiel.
This is a long hesitation. This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions implicit
Should
in
the
this.
human race survive?
Yes.
Okay.
But
He's been a major player in Silicon Valley for a long, long time.
I'm Peter Thiel. I build companies and I support people who are building new things, from social networks to rocket ships.
You might know him as the multi-billionaire who co-founded PayPal and Palantier, as Facebook's first outside investor, the guy who funds out their projects like floating countries, private space travel, and the quest for immortality. Peter Thiel rejects the idea that death is inevitable. He wants to transform humanity.
transhumanism was this radical transformation where your human natural body gets transformed into an immortal body. We want you to be able to change your heart and change your mind and change your whole body.
Okay, guys, so let's see what Marco Teruzzi has for us here. It's very important information. So, according to him, the future has arrived and I have bad news for you. If you don't stop it, it could be terrible, he says. Let's see why. Because I totally agree with him, no doubt. Technologies. The Silicon Valley mega company led by Peter Thiel and Alexander Karp that is expanding worldwide. Wars and surveillance, internal affairs of countries. We're going to go point by point so you can understand where they come from, what they do, what they want, and how they imagine our world, because they don't just want reshaping their world, reality, but everyone's. Let's get started. Founded in 2003 in Silicon Valley, California, that hub of technological innovation, where the large multinationals we know and sometimes suffer from, such as Apple, comes from companies like Apple, Google, or Meta, were born. PayPal was also born there in 1998, precisely by Peter Thiel and his partner, our partner Elon Musk, who see in that photo from about 30 years ago, that he is missing a few years that they have accumulated. But part of what became known as the PayPal Mafia that created several of these corporations or major Silicon Valley companies, some of them, as you can see, have known each other for a long time and think quite similarly. You're talking about the founders of Palantier, PayPal, etc. They think all alike, and they're pro-Zionist. Although Thiel, who was born in Germany, later moved to the United States and had a brief stint in South Africa, he was a kind of pioneering right-wing libertarian from Stanford University, where he studied philosophy and law. Unlike others, he did not have a stint in democratic liberalism, but rather turned out to be a con artist before Trump. So he didn't have to adapt to the presence of the Republican president in the White House, but already shared his ideas. Peter Thiel, was even the main investor in the campaign of J.D. Vance, current vice president of the United States and one of the possible candidates in 2028. Now, let's go back a little to 2003, when Palantir was founded with Peter Thiel as its visionary and Karp, Thiel also. Peter Thiel's law school colleague, who joined in 2004 as SEO. Palantir didn't just appear out of thin air, and this is very important, but was backed by In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital fund, and developed in collaboration with its analysts. The CIA then, headed by George Tenet under George W. Bush, wanted to promote new companies so that the United States intelligence will maintain its technological edge. So what was the CIA looking for back in 2003? New data analysts and new data analysis technologies, which is what Palantir does. Presented in this way, The story is no longer about the young geniuses of Silicon Valley, but about the CIA, that is the United States government funding a company for its security interests. Keep this in mind when we talk about what Palantir wants from the world now. Let's see now what exactly this company does. Palantir, in the friendly version, let's say it's a company specializing in big data analysis that develops platforms to integrate, visualize, and process complex information for decision making in critical scenarios. Put it bluntly, it is a private company born from the CIA that collects massive amounts of population data to put it at the service of wars of internal security, with the addition of artificial intelligence that gives it a data processing capacity at a speed that has never been possible before. To put it in classical terms, are you familiar with the concept of the panopticon from? I remember, of course, the French philosopher Michel Foucault. It doesn't say it here, but we all remember Noam Chomsky in a discussion when Noam was young, I believe in the 60s and 70s, with Michel Foucault, speaking about precisely what Palantir is doing right now. The panopticon, which is an all-seeing eye that knows the prisoners in the prison, but the prisoners don't know that they're being watched, to begin with, and how Donald Trump is imitating these Palantir processes that have been used first to submit the people of Gaza and now after committing genocide against them, and Lebanon and Syria, and whenever they feel like. Colombia, Central South America are no foreigners to the tactics used by Colonel Klein when it comes to assassinations and killing and the funding of paramilitary groups in those countries. The same with the CIA and John F. Kennedy, etc. So yeah, it's imitating the panopticon from the French philosopher Michel Foucault. Let's get back to the text. It refers to a surveillance device that is capable of seeing everything without being seen, watched and punished. Well, Palantir is that, but applied to the 21st century on a global scale, with all of our data handled by a private company, or at least that's what they want. That's what I was saying. When they say that the state has no grounds because they're stupid, the lawyers, the intellectuals of the state are stupid, only people that follow the Chicago Boys and follow all the neoliberalism, and till the 21st century, the state of terrorism, which is, of course, a handmade essential from Israel to the United States, in order for the United States to take over whatever Israel tell them to do. Is not only that, they're taking the world over, exporting, as I began explaining in this program from the beginning, the Western tradition, who was the leader of the world for centuries, now is being submitted by a foreign state, an invasive species that's taking over all the Western tradition initiatives to submit us, the country and the world, to wars initiatives as Palantirs. Okay, Peter Thiel and Karp, I hope they don't succeed. As I was saying, the future has already arrived, and the way it's presented does not show us a good future, not good at all. A small aside, as Ina said in the editorial, the word Palantir comes from the Lord of the Rings. These are the crystal spheres that allow one to see the future in the film, to watch from afar, and it also happens that who use them too much ends up becoming corrupted. Having made this small semantic clarification, let's move on to two central themes before turning to what was recently become, or has recently become, known as the Palantir Manifesto. First, just as Palantir was born under the protection of the CIA, it is growing an amazing fortunes thanks to the contracts, like I explained in the beginning too, with the United States government. Let's put it in numbers. In 2025, its contracts with the Trump administration increased by 66%. According to the Financial Times, in June of last year, he signed a $10 billion agreement with the United States, that is Palantir Army, lasting 10 years. $10 billion for 10 years. In December, it signed a $448 million agreement with the Navy to develop cheapos and operating systems intended to facilitate the development of modern warships, and received $1 million in contracts in 2025 from ICE. That is, this is terrible. The United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, it's already have contracts with Palantir. In the case of ICE, Palantir collects large amounts of population data, builds migrant patterns, and identifies suspects. Whatever it is, a suspect. I am a suspect, the journalists are a suspect, you are a suspect, everybody's a suspect if it's not for Trump or it's not for the state of Israel. And identifies suspects to be arrested and deported. In this case, it is not about monitoring and punishing, but about monitoring and deporting using population data provided by government agencies and to private companies, and where Trump security advisors and architect of immigration policy, Stephen Miller, which is a Zionist Jew and Zionist, also has personal financial interests. Listen, he owns between 100,000 and 250,000 between shares in Palantir, and you know which stocks rode with so many government contracts, right? Bingo! There we go. Everything is very obscene. Now let's move to the second point, and from there to the manifesto and central theme, which is this: the data. Because just as according to sociologists Max Baer, violence is the monopoly of the state, and it no longer is the same. Is true for data. Previously, only the state had knowledge of people's addresses, their images, passport numbers, taxes, and with that information, it could organize everything from vacational campaigns, vaccination campaigns, to surveillance systems. But all these have changed, and now large private companies like Palantir have control of the data, often more data than the states themselves have. Because social networks, for example, provide them with the data. And it's not just data, but the ability to use it through artificial intelligence. Data of all kinds, and very sensitive data, such as health data, as happened in England, where the National Health Service signed a $445 million sterling pounds contract with Palantir, which will now have access to the medical data of millions of patients. What ethical principles will use Palantir to manage them? Okay, we can imagine that, right? Can we? Now, let's close the circle. Palantir was created with the support of the CIA. It enriches itself with the state contracts, participates in wars such as in Iran or in the genocide in Gaza, and proceeds to a data colonization mechanism in the world that extracts them. And so it reaches the next step. The aim is to be more than just states, a kind of supra-state where states become subsidiaries of the companies themselves. And it's written that the so-called Palantir Manifesto that the company tweeted on April 18, a 22-point manifesto, which is actually a sort of extract of summary of Karp's book called The Technological Republic, published in October of last year. A book where they their project and they project the future they want, and above all, seeking to impose against us. Okay, so let's look at some of these points of the manifesto. Let's begin. Point 1. Silicon Valley has a moral debt to the country that made its rights possible. They say, the engineer elite of Silicon Valley has an obligation to participate in the defense of the nation. In other words, companies like Palantir must put themselves at the top of the line instead of the states and the service of the United States imperial strategy and enter the battlefield. Spoiler alert, they're already doing it. Point 4 of the manifesto. The limits on the soft power of bombastic rhetoric alone have been exposed. The ability of a free and democratic society to prevail requires more than just moral appeal. It requires hard power, and hard powers in this century will be built on software. It's not just the bombs that Alvaro Uribe used in Colombia, killing and assassinating women and children, dressing them up with military gear, so they will be identified as enemies of the state. All that for security. So what they did, they called people with retardation, with Down syndrome. They killed them for money, for restaurants, for free premises, so they can see their family a little more, so the soldiers can kill them all in the name of security because they were opposing Álvaro Uribe's view and sight for the future of Colombia, which was kill them all. Whomever opposing everybody's communist. Enter the universities. Who are the students? Who are against us? Who are against America's view? According to, I'm sorry to say, President John F. Kennedy, when he created the enemy within, now that some advisors told him from the CIA that the enemy was the communists and the communists were everywhere, and that might be true, but it was not that true. So that the enemy within became the killing and assassinations from Mexico to La Patagonia, El Salvador, Colombia, Nicaragua, etc. Argentina, Chile became dictatorships with Pinochet and many others, generals in Argentina, Videla and others, that Brazil in 61, etc., in order to kill and destroy student groups that were just wanting a better way of living and not slavery salaries like the United States is providing for Central and South America since the Monroe Doctrine, etc. So when we see that the hard power in this center is built on software, it is written that way. So let's translate the time has come to change methods, to put the civilian world at the service of the military. In fact, Palantier has an internal slogan that says, and I quote, "Software is now the weapons system," unquote. Point 5 from the manifesto states, and I quote, "The question is not whether artificial intelligence weapons will be built, but who will build them and for what purposes. Of course, more Jewish corporations, more Jewish contracts from the state of Israel, whether it's already taking Silicon Valley, Facebook, Amazon, all these people, Palantir and others that cooperate with CIA. We saw that way before in these programs with what Facebook did in the case of England. So they want to build them for what purposes? Our adversaries. There's always panic. It's the Russians, it's the Chinese, it's Colombians, it's the Mexicans, it's the drugs, it's the fentanyl, it's blah. But in the meantime, everything get private. The prisons get private, the corporations get private, with our money, without our permission, in order for them to make the decisions with our permission, our vote or participation. Nothing about the people without the people, I insist. From Canada. Build them for what purposes? Our adversaries will not pause to engage in theatrical debates or the merits of developing technology with critical military and national security applications. They will proceed, said Palantir. In other words, the race is on. It must be won. And there is absolutely no debate to be had about the use of artificial intelligence in warfare, given how dangerous that is, unquote. Point 8 of the Techno-Fascist Manifesto states, the point 8, and I quote, "Civil servants need not to be our priests. Any company that paid its employees the way the federal government pays civil servants would struggle to survive," unquote. In other words, Palantir is above the state and its officials. Furthermore, states should be at the service of large corporations in addition to being downsized, as Elon Musk, Peter Thiel's friend, began to be with the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, the famous Dodge. And I continue with point 12, which is the central geopolitical thesis of the book. And it says, and I quote, "An era of deterrence, that atomic age is ending, and a new era of deterrence based on artificial intelligence is about to begin." In other words, times have changed. The artificial intelligence revolution has arrived, which will be the central point of the world's reorganization, and Palantir will be the fundamental infrastructure of this new order. I'll go with one more point, they say. And I quote, "We must resist the superficial temptation of an empty, insubstantial pluralism. In the United States, and more broadly, in the West, we have resisted defining national cultures in the name of inclusion for the past half century. But inclusion, end of quote. We have resisted the inclusion in the last century, end of quote. There were no Muslims, no Latinos, nobody but Israeli that have taken over the races that come from Europe and now have become the state of Zion and Zion state, now in America, becoming blue-eyed and white, because they were never that kind of people. They were like Palestinian people, dark-skinned, dark eyes, black-eyed, etc. But what inclusion are they talking about? In this translation, liberal democracy is a burden. Cultural inclusion is a problem. Let's return to a Christian national system with everyone more restricted democracy. Because of course I haven't made it explicit until now, but you can already imagine what Peter Thiel and his associates' conception of democracy is. If the state, in its logic, must be subsidiary to transnational corporations, then democracy is an obstacle, to say the least, and it's not a secret. In 2009, Peter Thiel, for example, said that freedom and democracy are no longer compatible, and that's the vision they seek to impose within the United States and Europe and the Western tradition to export abroad in their plan. Because those technologies, technolo-fascists or technarians have a plan for the future of humanity and are determined to lead us into that direction. The question is, how do we stop them and build an alternative? Listen, people. For 11 years, this program has said that the wars for independence are back. And the wars for independence and the Nuremberg trial that has to happen to Donald Trump and to the state of Israel, whether who is in charge, because it doesn't matter if Donald Trump dies or doesn't finish his term. Whomever comes after him is going to be worse than him, and the same is going to happen in Israel. Israel is no different than the United States. On the contrary, it's leading it to what we are watching. And what we're watching is nothing but the destruction of humanity in order for them to take over the world, diminish billions of people through wars, assassination, killings, genocide, etc., so that they can take over with artificial intelligence and make, themselves the owners of the world. But I can guarantee you this. These people are so greedy, but so greedy that can only be one, and they are going to end up being the kings of the ashes, not only for the billions of people they genocide, but for themselves, because they're going to end up killing each other for their own ambitions. Peter Thiel against Elon Musk against everybody that has anything to do with this world. These people are so rich and so ambitious and so greedy and so stupid and so evil and demonic that's the definition of demon and demonic, which is everything that God created has to be opposed and destroyed. And there can only be one. They're going to end up killing each other after they are the kings of the ashes, etc. So how can we stop them and build an alternative? Is the question. That world of data colonization, behavior control, millimeter precise surveillance, artificial intelligence warfare, and supranational powers are finally the question from here on. From where we think, what is being done, what should be done in Latin America, in Central America, in the Western tradition, in the fate of this future that has already arrived in the terms of technology development to build artificial intelligence, big data centers belonging to the states that are public in democratic systems, and not of some guy in Silicon Valley who dreams of American supremacy and the reconquest of the continent. Otherwise, we risk becoming a data query, just as we are a query of the raw materials for centuries, with the United States having less power than other Silicon Valley nationals who have already officially declared war on the interests of Washington and its Lord Donald Trump. Thanks, mate. Okay, so let's take a look to this. Oh, my back is killing me. They don't want the human race to survive. They seek to impose within the United States and export abroad in the plan because. Okay. Oh, he's been a major player in Silicon Valley for a long time. I'm Peter Thiel. I build companies and I support people who are building new things from social networks to rocket ships. You might know him as a multi-billionaire who co-founded PayPal and Palantier as Facebook's first outsider investor, the guy who funds out their projects like floating countries, private space travel, and the quest for immortality. Peter Thiel rejects the idea that death is inevitable. He wants to transform humanity. Transhumanism was this radical transformation where your human natural bodies transform into a mechanical issue, a computerized system that lives forever. That's transhumanism. We talked about it 10 years ago, guys, if you remember my shows. So what are we going to talk about surviving these ideas that are taking over state? Now, if we have to think like the compañero, we are in trouble. If we want to think like Peter Thiel, yes, we humanity are in trouble. We are. Yes, if your vote is taken into account, we're all here to play. Okay, let's clear. See what's coming and who knows. Let's go. About everything about this issue. And that is, who's going to know better than the guys that are making this? What's coming and what can we know? Tell me everything and exaggerate with it. Stefania Veloz is saying that imagine that one day you open a magazine and read about a young man who has just invented a way to send money by email and seems like a harmless little genius. But years later, that same young man and his partner start developing another idea which is more dangerous than that. Why? Because years later, that same person, that same young man and his partner control the largest military espionage systems on the planet, sell t-shirts as if they were rock stars, and give secret lectures about the arrival of the Antichrist. Let's start with the first time they were mentioned in print. We travel back to 1999, where Time magazine published an article titled Electronic Commerce, PayPal's Big Play. The next describes Peter simply as a high-tech financier who wants to make payments faster. The newspaper stole his basic biography, a boy born in Germany who grew up in South Africa like Elon Musk, and studied law at Stanford University and philosophy. He was the typical profile of a young, hardworking entrepreneur who was well liked by the reader, but the friendly coverage didn't last long when the press realized the true power of his business. Well, they decided to change the tone, right? Even if it's just a little bit, because back in 2007, Fortune magazine published a report that dubbed them the PayPal Mafia. Literally, in this article, they dress Peter Thiel and his friends in gangster suits posing on armchair smoking cigars, and the press decides it's better to romanticize the monopoly presented by them as a group of brilliant rebels like characters from The Sopranos. A journalistic analysis of the roots of the so-called PayPal mafia pointed out that its origins extended back to the time of the shutdown and revealed that figures like Elon Musk grew up under the privilege of a stratified racial order, while Peter Thiel lived during his childhood in a city that openly venerated Adolf Hitler. Yes, Adolf Hitler. Peter Thiel lived in Swakopmund in southwest Africa, or Namibia, where he attended a German school while his father worked in a uranium mine where black workers received subsistence wages and faced dangerous and precarious working conditions. In the 1970s, this city was known for its continued glorification of Nazism, to the point that some of its inhabitants still used the Nazi salute in the streets and celebrated Hitler's birthday as a mosque. Like Elon Musk and Alex Karp comes from that same Stanford group. When Alex Karp, and Peter Thiel founded the company Palantier with Elon Musk to sell surveillance systems, the media rushed to soften their image. In 2013, Forbes magazine published a giant profile of Karp. The headline calls him, and I quote, a deviant philosopher who built a CIA-funded giant, unquote. Forbes tells us that Karp is the son of a pediatrician and an artist who has a doctorate in social theory from the University of Frankfurt and teaches meditation classes in his office. They portray a guy with messy hair and colorful sportswear so that people quickly forget that their product is used to spy on citizens, among other things. This harmless profile served him well for a time, but when the contracts with the army became worth billions of dollars, the major newspapers opened their opinion pages to him. The Washington Post published an article written by Karp. There, a private contractor explains to the government why technology companies should manufacture weapons with artificial intelligence, and the New York Times does the same. They gave him a space for an essay called Our Oppenheimer Moment. The editors allow Karp to compare himself to the creator of the atomic bomb as if he were a scientist tortured by his invention and not the owner of a corporation cashing huge checks from the state. That means people's money. But nothing comes from the people. All the investments and the wealth they produce stays with them. Nothing comes trickling down, fiat kind like of economy. Never. Nothing trickles down to anybody. Look America, look Canada, poverty, fentanyl taking over. Look the European countries, look England, look the poverty growing in England. For the last 20 years I have covered Saskia Sassin explaining how Europe is going to hell and England is going to hell and poverty is growing. Get back to the text. The Atlantic magazine ultimately bestowed upon its prestige. They published reviews of his book applauding how he's magnificent and how the criticizes other engineers for making food apps instead of manufacturing hard weaponry for the country. Well, no further comment is needed here. Weaponry for the country. All of this sounds like a big public relations operation, but journalist Caroline Haskins reports something unusual in Wire magazine on September 22nd, 2025. The article is called Palantier, the controversial military technology company. Now it wants to be a fashion brand. Will you wear Palantier clothing? Oh, don't ask me. The article details how the defense technology giant is selling t-shirts and tote bags to encourage its followers to publicly support them. It is the ultimate effort to turn a war machine into a lifestyle trend. They want young people to walk down the street wearing their logo without thinking about the military contracts behind it. And while they sell fashionable tote bags, CARP's actual message is brutal. CARP's actual message is brutal. Let's see it. In February 2025, during a call with investors broadcast by NBC, CARP said they were there to scare enemies and sometimes, if necessary, kill them. The news network does not question the debt promise. It only analyzes whether the shares will rise on the stock market, where ultimately is what they want and what worries us all. Am I right? We don't care about the security of our future and the future that they are bringing to us. We just worry how much money we can make if we invest in there. Am I right? No, you're not. We think about our future. Not all of us have the money to invest in such enterprises. And boy, are they rising. Guardian reports that CARP was the highest paid CEO in the United States, taking home an amazing sum. Nearly $6 million in a single year. If CARP's profile went from philosopher to clothing brand and arms dealer, Peter Thiel went straight to cover mysticism. On June 26, 2025, the New York Times published a massive interview with columnist Marvin Down, and the headline reads, and I quote, "Peter fears the Antichrist is coming," close quote. The Antichrist! The newspaper dedicates its main space to discussing his religious fears, noting that the Antichrist is anyone who calls for regulating technology. In that same interview, the journalist asks if the human race will survive in the future to Peter Thiel, and Peter Thiel, as you just saw, hesitates and at length stammers and finally says, and I quote, "Yes, the newspaper prints this as a mere theoretical musing instead of alerting the public about a defense contractor who, isn't entirely sure whether he wants us to stay alive or not." The British press plays into the same hands as the London Times. They start reporting on secret lectures as Peter Thiel is giving in Rome near the Vatican, discussing the politics of the Antichrist. They portray him as a mysterious character from a spy novel like that. And when the newspapers have him at the height of weirdness, the entertainment industry turns him into a comedy. Websites like IGN excitedly review the premiere of the new season of the animated series South Park in October 2025. I haven't watched South Park in a long time. The episode is called Twisted Christian, and since Marco hasn't watched South Park in ages, there's going to be a bit of a Comedy Central broadcast. The kids at the school become obsessed with an internet name called 6/7, that is 6. Peter Thiel arrives in town, convinced that this meme is a cold plot to bring the Antichrist to Earth. I have to watch it. The episode is quite funny. I'm laughing but my head off if this guy weren't responsible for all the atrocities that can happen his company commits. The AB Club article explains how they drew Peter Thiel's cartoon. They gave him bugging eyes, a giant forehead full of veins, trying to perform exorcisms on elementary school kids. The entertainment press applauds the writers for mocking the tech elite. The media focuses so much on the joke about the school meme and the cartoon's ugliness that the true power of this man vanishes. The public watches the episode, laughs, and thinks that someone so pathetic in a cartoon like this can possibly be a threat to the real world. They turn danger into laughter. All these media spectacles are very calculated tactics. They started in finance magazines as the Stanford Smart Kids, and then became the PayPal Mafia. Then dressed up as mobsters, then released his urban fashion like and ended up as a cartoon on a cable television network. Let's not forget, although they want it that way, this occurs while the states give them data from the entire planet, guys. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, for Christ's sake. A joyous New Year and a happy holiday to everyone celebrating. We at Palantier are deeply grateful for your support, your generosity. We know how courageous of you have been to support us in public and in private while we attempt to support a the firefighters, and others who do deeply important and often dangerous things to secure our way of life, that we are superior art in the West. We believe pounder is a metaphor for the splendor and artistry and discipline necessary to build a great things. Whatever. You're hearing in English version. Last Sunday, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Boca and River faced off. Amidst confetti, car paints, and chants in the stands, there was an atypical present, the Lord of Darkness, the one you just heard about. Yes, Peter Thiel, the co-founder and owner of Palantier, was at the Monumental Stadium accompanied by his husband, Matt Dannens, a former BlackRock executive. His presence in Buenos Aires was revealed by our colleague, Alejandro Berkovic. Okay, Thiel operates with the utmost secrecy and information is scarce, but the revelation has provided some clues. What is known? He has been there for a week, bought a mansion, and reportedly plans to stay for 2 months. And yesterday it was learned that he held talks with River Plate executives, River Plate is a football club in Argentina, who facilitated his access to the stadium. Furthermore, he has already met with Santiago Caputo, President Milei's advisor, and also with some business leaders whose opinions they wanted to hear about the direction of the country. What is Thiel doing in Argentina? What interests does he have? Peter Thiel, like Javier Milei, he's an anarcho-capitalist and wants to experience firsthand the experiment in which I, as an Argentine citizen, am the Guinea pig. He's curious about cultural phenomena and social dynamics. From that perspective, football, what happens in the stands during a match, especially a superclásico like River Boca, is an outlet of story for him regarding collective behavior and this key word, mass psychology. The word is key. Peter Thiel is right. Here, I want to focus on 3 points. First, the expression, I quote, mass psychology, says the journalist, became established at the end of the 19th century. Why is this moment important and why is this relevant to us today as we talk about Peter Thiel on a football pitch? Well, because mass psychology was born at the same time that our societies were rapidly growing and urbanizing. Strikes and protests were seen as a danger to civilization, and mass psychology emerged as a response from the elite to the fear provoked by large concentrations of workers within the context of industrialization and the mobilizations that they arose at their dinner. Second point, mass psychology was taken up by Sigmund Freud in 1921, who published a book that will become a classic, Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Masses, in which he sought to explain why people unite and what role identification with a leader plays. Third point, in the following years, studies on mass psychology multiplied alongside the rise of fascism, and we can identify 2 different approaches. On the one hand, there were social scientists who had an interest in studying and understanding the phenomenon, many of them from a critical perspective, and the other approach was that of the fascists, who had a practical interest in fascism. Mass psychology was a tool to manipulate this new actor that was emerging, the crowd, this threatening mass. The fascists were at that time our engineers of chaos in the present moment. As now, as then, the ruling classes needed a new social technology to govern rapidly changing societies, a social technology that would allow them to manipulate the masses while simultaneously protecting the interests of the ruling classes. Today, times are different. Are they? Our societies have changed, but that fear remains and resurfaces with greater force at a time when the world has entered a turbulent transition toward a new order that, frankly, we are quite far from knowing what it will be. In the 19th century, I don't agree. I think we know. The elite in the 19th century, the elite feared the masses that were forming due to urbanization. They were organizing and protesting. In this 21st century, the fear comes hand in hand with inequality. For the engineers of chaos, the techno-magnates and the anarcho-capitalists, it's not about creating less unequal societies. I wish it were, but it is about how to govern such unequal societies that thrive on unequally how to manipulate the masses so they don't rebel against so much injustice. Is capitalism in the 21st century governable through liberal democracy, or is another technology for social control and another non-democratic institutional framework needed? That's what they're asking themselves. What do the 21st century techno-magnates do if not all of us are following them? A businessman who manufactures glass while watching a football match is an anecdote, but Peter Thiel or any other of his class is not an anecdote, because that's what they do for a living. Their companies are factories of consensus manipulation and social control. They are factories of governance and at the service of the dominant classes, whoever they may be, bankers, etc. But not only that, the subservient politicians that serve them and are bribed by them, like the American Congress, the European Union Congress, and the UK Congress, whose popularity is well down. They dedicate themselves to capturing our attention and manipulating algorithms through the messages we receive. All business people seek to make more money. Tech magnates too, but they differ because they are highly idealized, as Marco told us, and their project is eminently political. Their job is to shape the societies in which we live. They are not business people interested in politics. Everything about them is politics. Everything about them is political. For us, Instagram is a platform where we can see, I don't know, kittens, puppies, gardening tips, recipes. For our friends, children, or even cuts from the Latin American base, and people are nothing but products. That seems dangerous, but behind the appearances for tech magnates, for intelligence agencies, and for the military-industrial complex, and for the United States government, Instagram is an instrument of war. And the battlefields are our attention, our brains, our ideas. Let's return to River Plate Stadium. What was Peter Thiel doing at the Monumental Stadium in Núñez? He wasn't watching a football match. He was observing the stance and the collective behavior. Like a true first 11th century fascist, Peter Thiel revived an interest in mass psychology, just as his predecessors, the 20th century fascists, did, and that's not going to change. As we said before, we must include technology companies within that universe called the military-industrial complex, and they are not just within it, they are becoming its brains. Artificial intelligence intervenes by directing weapon systems. Let's not forget that this has already been used in Caracas, in Gaza, and everywhere, in the assassinations carried out by the Southern Command in the Caribbean and the Pacific. We must also consider the context of Peter Thiel's interest in Latin America. It occurs within the framework of the United States policy for hemispheric dominance and the revival of the Monroe Doctrine, which we have explained here time and again, as I explained at the beginning of the program, in like. Palantier is an instrument at the service of the policies aimed to infiltrate Latin American states, European states, American states, Canadian states, Western tradition, and the whole world. The information they handle, control their activities, and ultimately know more about the country than the country itself knows about themselves. The only Latin American countries, as the Western tradition state, where Palantier's presence has been made public is Ecuador. Last year, the government of banana magnate Daniel Noboa signed an agreement to use the Palantir Foundry platform in the National Customs Service. The stated objective is to combat smuggling and tax fraud. The software uses artificial intelligence to analyze data in real time, accelerate management, identify patterns linked to illicit activities, and improve operational efficiency at ports and airports. It reviews and cross-references the history of importers and exporters, the routes used, the value of goods, and frequencies, and can detect any unusual movements in all the areas where Palantir operates. and its core function remains the same. A massive data processing capacity integrating pre-existing databases and sensors that transmit in real time the large volumes of data combined with this capacity processing them quickly allows us to find patterns that would escape our notice and that wouldn't have time to analyze even if we dedicate a lifetime to it. That's why what we said was literal. Palantir knows more about Ecuador's foreign trade than Ecuador's itself. Through Palantir, the United States can infiltrate Latin American states, access their secrets, and add a new tool, a new lever of power to control us. Ironically, the price for being controlled, for surrendering sovereignty, is paid by the states that act as victims. Formally, the state hires a company. Behind the appearances, what lies is a company that infiltrates to capture parts of the state apparatus. That's the plan, and it aligns with the ideas publicly expressed by two ideologies who work as businessmen running Palantir. I'm referring to Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, whom were mentioned several times on this program. When a Latin American state hires Palantir, what it's doing is buying a network that will be used against it. So this was important for me to show to you guys here in Canada, there in the United States, and whomever speaks English around the world, because this is happening all over the world. This is not only in the third world countries. You might say, no, it's in the third world countries. Europe, the United States, Canada are being treated as third world countries for the last 25 years, but especially since, of course, the war on terror, because everybody is a terrorist according to Palantir that doesn't agree with them. There's many things to say about these guys. I don't know what you think about this program, this show, but this is the version of the Book of Revelation and its own words, that where you're not going to be able to buy or sell anything. And like these people say, we will take your money, we will take your future, we will take everything. That is not democratic. That is colonization process from other entities that we don't know about, like President Donald Trump manifested in his first term, as shown in my program 7 years ago. When it comes to extraterrestrials, there are other civilizations interested in us, not in a good way. So we need to know that, we need to act about it, and we need to respond about it democratically. $100 billion for the Golden Dome, 5% for weaponry. Jeffrey Sachs has explained just recently, last week, to the European Commission and the European Forum that Europe has to take care and take charge of their own. We cannot trust the United States. The United States is corrupt to the core because the United States lives and sells anything that has to do with the state of Israel, and the state of Israel is an invasive species, I repeat it, and I don't disagree with Jeffrey Sachs and John Mersheimer and many, many others, Stephen Walt, and myself, when I expose this to you Canadians. And for us, for the country, for the world, I hope that you understand that we're in the hands of devilish people that are not taking us on account whatsoever, and that the government of our Prime Minister and the next Prime Minister, whether it's conservative or liberal, is going to follow the same procedures, which is give the private corporations all power above us citizens and above the vote. Vote is just an illusion. Yeah, remember this guy joking about that you're conservatives or liberals, Republicans or Democrats. It's all lies. So we need to prepare ourselves, guys, and I hope that Jesus, if you're listening to this message from React Today as part of the World's Wealth Project, today on Stand Up Politics, we Canadians have to react today to this matter, inform ourselves, vote for me, find a way to create a new party, because Canada's parties, like the American parties and the European Union parties, are nothing but subservience to the state of Israel, the Zionist lobby, and not only that, the interest of this invasive species, which is to take over the world. And if you have heard what I just said, and not me, but journalism from La Base, which is a European journalist-based institution, let's say, is also covering Latin America. But don't be misguided, guys. Canada, the United States UK, the Western tradition is being governed worse than third world countries in the days of John F. Kennedy. For us, for the country, for the world, hope to see you next time in the next edition of React Today as part of the World's Way Out project, 11 years. Today, stand-up politics on artificial intelligence and corporations dictating policy. Au revoir, bye-bye, hasta pronto.